First, I'd like to apologize. I got caught in the rain, as you can tell, trying to download everything. My name is Jalisha, and I'm from Montgomery County Soil and Water. I'm the Ag Economic Development Program Coordinator for the county. And we heard about solar farms being of high interest to everyone right now. So we decided to organize this event for you guys to get information. No one here is really going to give you a sales pitch. We're just here to inform you and answer any questions you have. Each person will get up and talk for roughly 10 to 20 minutes. And then at the end, we will have 20 minutes for question and answers. So ask all the presenters to come back up afterwards. And we'll have a free-for-all for questions, an organized manner, of course. And we'll have the appropriate person answer the question. All right. This is Matt from New York State Ag and Markets. And he will tell you which part solar folks.
My name is Van Brouwer. I'm with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and I've been there for about 24 years working in farmland preservation. Before that, I worked here in Montgomery County in the Soil and Water Conservation District. And so I've got a number of responsibilities when it comes to farmland preservation. I work a lot on construction projects on farmland, things like the wind energy projects, electric transmission lines, natural gas pipelines, and highway projects, anything basically that would involve construction on farmland. Also involved in helping administer the agricultural district law and certain provisions in that, reviewing local laws to make sure they don't unreasonably restrict farm operations. So I get a chance to get involved in a number of things, and the solar ended up being the new latest and greatest thing that I got involved in. And it's quite a bit different than the wind energy, but both have a pretty good impact on agricultural land. So unfortunately for you, I'm probably going to give you more questions than answers tonight, because there's a lot to this. It's new, and a lot of it is things that you, as a landowner, if you're going to decide to look into this issue, you're going to have to find answers to these questions. And those answers are going to have to come from the developers and lawyers and other people involved in this. But it's things that are going to be important to a farm operation or an agricultural landowner. So the first thing is, if you received a letter from one of the companies, you probably are aware that they're talking about upwards of 20 acres or so of land that would be used for the solar panels. And they're talking about pretty long-term lease agreement, something in the neighborhood of 20 years, with possibly an option to renew for another 20 years. So that will tie up land for a considerable amount of time. And so the first question would be for an active farm operation is, can you afford to tie up that land for 20 years? That and how many acres will it involve? That's the first thing you have to think about. And then the other thing is it going to be some of your better land? Ideally, they probably want to build these things on land that is cleared, is relatively flat, well drained. So a lot of times, that kind of puts you on some of the prime farmland. So do you want to give up 20 acres of that? And is the lease agreement better than what you can make growing crops on that? So that's a consideration that you have to keep in mind. And if you're not the landowner, or I'm sorry, if you're not the farmer, if you're the landowner and you're renting that land out, you have to keep in mind that that may have an impact on the operation that's renting your land. And if you are renting out 50 acres to a farm and you take 20 acres and lease that to a solar company, well, that farm now may not be interested in renting the other 30 acres because it may not be worth their while to have to travel a fair distance and so on. So that's another thing about as a landowner who's renting your land out, is how will that impact the operation that you're working with. So keep that in mind. The taxes is one of the bigger issues, and there's really a lot of unknowns about that, because as an agricultural landowner, you would know that farmland gets the agricultural value exemption since it's in production. But if you put solar panels on that, that's a conversion And now, first of all, it will not qualify for the agricultural assessment, but also there's a penalty for the conversion if you've been receiving the agricultural assessment. So the question is, who's going to pay that penalty? Do you pay it? Does the developer pay it? You know, how is that going to be handled? And what about the potential increase in property taxes that would result from the installation of the solar panels? They are real property. There is an exemption in state law from increases in county and school taxes for solar panels, but municipalities and school districts can opt out of that exemption. So if they choose to do that, who's going to pay that increase in property taxes? The exemption lasts for 15 years. What happens after 15 years? If you signed a 20-year lease, the exemption runs out in 15 years. The next 5 years, who's going to pay for that increase in taxes if there is one? So that's something to keep in mind as well. As far as the acreage goes, not only will the project tie up the land where the panels are installed, but likely they'll have some type of control over land adjacent to that, so that there's nothing shading the panels, for example. So you have to think about that as a farm operation. What if you want to build a new building in that vicinity and they tell you, sorry, you can't do it. So if you're going to enter into one of these agreements, you want to make sure that these things are put someplace where it's not going to impact any expansions you might be thinking about, any other properties you might be wanting to subdivide and sell, because there again, if it's adjacent to the panel, they may have some control over what you can do with that property. So you really got to look at the language and be aware of the fact that it impacts not only where the panels go, but land in that vicinity as well. And then one of the other things to think about is all the other things that go along with the installation of the panels. You're probably going to need an access road of some type, and you need to know what is that road going to be made of, what is the surface going to be? Is it going to be a type of stone? How is the drainage, how is that road going to affect drainage? On a lot of the wind projects I've been on, they put in some pretty substantial access roads, and we run into considerable drainage problems because of that access road, because you took what was permeable soil that the water could infiltrate through, and you put a hard gravel base there, and now the water runs off. And sometimes that water runs off, creates an erosion problem. Sometimes the access road will actually dam the water up and create a flooding problem in the field. So you have to think about access roads and drainage and how they're going to affect the area around that access road. There's probably going to be some type of electrical connection between the solar panels and the electric grid or transmission or distribution system. So is that going to be underground, and what type of construction is that going to involve in terms of trenching, depth, and so on? If they're undergrounding any cables, you want to make sure, in farmland, you want to make sure it's at least 4 foot underground, so it's not going to be a problem if you want to put drain tiles in or something else in the future. If it's going to be overhead, you got to think about the location of those poles and how is that going to affect your machinery operation if it cuts across another field. We had some pretty good problems with some of the wind projects where they ran some of the electric lines overhead, and the poles were actually spaced pretty close together in ag fields, about the same distance as you would have for like an electric distribution line along the road. So it made it quite an obstacle course for the farm equipment. And they actually placed the poles in a number of cases. We suggested they put it right along the edge of the field. Well, sometimes that was a property line, and because of the easement, they wanted to be set out from the property line a certain distance, so you ended up with poles about 50 feet from the edge of the field. And so in some cases, that 50 feet ended up being abandoned because they couldn't get the equipment between the poles and the hedgerow. So that's another thing to think about, is where this electric line is going to be located, and will it impact equipment operation. And then probably one of the more important things too to think about at the end of all this is the removal of the panel. at some point in time, this thing may go away. And who's gonna remove it, and how are they gonna remove it? If those panels are anchored with some type of concrete footer, pier, whatever, are they gonna remove those piers and to what depth? We always say, anytime you have something like that in an agricultural field, again, it should be removed to a depth of at least 4 feet, so that if you're out there plowing or digging for some reason, you're not gonna hit it. The electric lines, if they're underground, a lot of times we say it's better just to abandon them in place, especially if they're, 4 feet in the ground, because digging them up causes more disturbance than just leaving them there. So you might want any underground electric lines left in place, but anything overhead you probably would want removed, and any structures that support the solar panels and the foundations and so on, you would most likely want to have removed. So, and then how's it going to be restored? There's maintenance issues. They're going to want to keep the area under the solar panel clear. They're not going to want it to grow up the brush. So how's that going to be maintained? If you're an organic farm and they're maintaining it with chemicals, is that going to be a problem? That's another consideration. So you want to definitely know what type of maintenance is going to be involved for the site. I think that's pretty much all the questions I have for you. It's, there's a lot of things to consider, but especially I think you really need to think about the taxes and how that's going to be addressed. So if you have any questions for me, yeah.
You speak about a life long time here of 15 to 20 years. I would have to assume that the value of those panels would also depreciate during that time.
That's entirely possible.
So therefore, the taxes on the end of the 15 years may not be that high.
Yep, that's possible. They may come in and upgrade them possibly over the course of 15 years. That's what they talked about with the wind energy project. That was the same kind of thing. Well, what happens with that turbine on top of the tower at the end of 15 years? It might not be any good. And they said, well, we'll just pick it off there and put a new one on. It's probably more efficient. So they may, in 10 years, put more efficient panels in there and then go back to where you started. So could go either way. The other thing to think about with that too, though, is what's that land going to be worth in 20 years? And what might you want to use it for in 20 years? So, yeah, it's a long time, and things could work in your favor financially, but it could go the other way and not be as good a deal.
This information on the conversion from agricultural to is that penalty online, so that you can do calculations to see what it might be?
It tells online what the formula is, and it has to do with the number of years you're receiving agricultural assessment. And I forget the exact formula, but the formula is online, and your assessor would know it.
Where is it online?
On our Ag Markets website, which is www.agriculture.ny.gov, and it would be under the Division of Land and Water Resources. I can tell you it's not easy to find. So I have cards here. Our website's not real handy. I have cards here. Anybody that thinks they may want to try to look that up, you might want to grab a card and just shoot me an email, and I'll see if I can find that section of law or point you in the right direction, send you something a little easier.
What happens when the company that puts this unit in decides to go bankrupt or decides to sell the lease that they have with you to someone else, and then after the 25 years or 20 years they decide they're going to walk away? Who is ultimately liable for the removal of that? The landowner?
That's one of the many questions, and I assume
I mean,
the legal person will speak tonight.
they're making a lease. They aren't buying this property. They don't own it.
That's correct. And you have to look at the language in the easement and see how all that is, if it is covered.
Right.
And if it's not, you probably want to make sure that you put some language in there to cover it. I think the attorney will probably touch on some of that tonight, maybe. That gets into more of the easement language, which I try to stay away from.
All right. Don't worry, if you have more questions, we'll have everyone come up afterwards. You guys can ask all your questions then as well. Next, I have Frank from NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. In your programs, I have given you guys contact names for all the speakers and their contact information. I did make an issue with...
Which is, it's a pretty interesting thing. So that as long as you're putting into the grid in a certain geographical area, I'm not sure what zone you are in here, but I'm like in the Albany area a lot. So from Albany to like Saratoga Springs, that's kind of an ISO zone. So they're pretty big areas, the ISO zones that you have to choose from. Okay, so they're saying total development costs $4 to $6 million before incentives. What there is for incentives, there's a 30% federal income tax credit to the developer, 30% of the cost they get back on their income taxes. So they can monetize the tax credits by luring banks and investors in to help finance the deal. They get the tax credit, they avoid paying federal income taxes. In addition to that, they have a 5-year depreciation allowance. They can fully depreciate the system in 5 years. Those are what lure in that private investment. Now, those are federal tax credits. New York is leveraging those federal dollars to kind of do that, to bring it into New York. Okay? That's revenue and jobs that are coming into New York using the federal money. It's still come out of the taxpayers, and I'm one of them, so I get it. But if we don't take it, somebody else will. So, all right? So, let's see. This is, you can get these slides there, but the responsibilities of the sponsors, they have to manage the portfolio of customers, basically, allocate the credits, change them once a month. If people don't pay that they're supposed to pay, they can sell it to somebody else. This is a really good deal for the lease companies because unlike door-to-door solar where they're putting it on a rooftop, if the customer fails to pay them, they have a stranded asset on the rooftop. With a solar farm, if the customer that they subscribe to didn't pay the bill that month, they can turn around and sell that power to a different customer the following month. So that's pretty good. All right. So I'm running a little bit over, so I'm going to try to cut this short a little bit. All right. Municipalities are great users of power, and sometimes they can be part of these shared solar themselves. They can get in where they have commercial buildings, they have highway garages, they may have a water plant, they may have a sewer plant, they may have all these kind of buildings. There could be a firehouse, there could be a school, elementary school. There's a separate program for schools called the K Solar program, which is designed to take care of schools. All right, but again, we have various people can run these, and like I said, this is a little bit too long for what we're trying to do, so I'm going to cut it short here a little bit. And I want to get to questions. Okay, understanding the end of life, 25-year plus, what happens to the system at the end of that life? You got to know what you can and can't do. They added some slides on me, and I think they went over it. All right, interconnection. Interconnection we talked about really quickly. That's what the grid can handle. The grid can't handle. It depends on what the infrastructure's in place. If it's not there, it's not there, okay? So you're going to need legal, you're going to need accounting services for people to help you get through this. The real property tax exemption, the real property tax law 487, that's the one you need to know. The decommissioning information. The other thing that runs into solar too is the SEQA process. State Environmental Quality Review Act applies. Typically on the solar farms, it's the long form, it's a long process that has to be taken care of. The applicants have to do that. That's usually a declaration of a lead agency. Typically, it is the local town municipality will step in and take lead. If they don't, then the next person would be probably the county. And if the county doesn't, then the state. So, but that all has to go through that process. kind of an example of the thing. We talked a little bit about foundations earlier. A lot of the foundations are driven now, they're not concrete bases. They come in with like a pile driver slip setup, and they'll put them in so they can pull them out easier. All right, just some information about membership. I don't think any of you people are looking to be members, but it is something to consider if you are going to lease it on your land. You know, say, hey, can I be a member, and what are you going to charge me per kilowatt hour for my own power? You know, definitely something to talk to them about. Escalation are important. Like I said, escalation on the lease. You need to know all that. Okay, so PV Trainers Network, the green bags out there. We do education for lots of different things. And like I said, I apologize, there's too many slides for what we need tonight. But take some questions quick. I ran over a little bit, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
That 2 megawatt limit, that's for the total for the project? Or
That's the AC capacity right now that you can interconnect to the grid maximum. But the gentleman over here mentioned that they're talking about raising it to 5.
But can you group these together on the same parcel of land and it's just a different connection at a different point?
If the grid can handle it. You could have multiple meters. You could have two KWs right next to each other with 2 separate meters, if that power line can handle it. The problem that you're going to find is that the limitations of the power line are going to determine the size of the system.
Okay, so if you have a 3-phase line going down some route, and the ones closest to the substation, they put in first, the people down to the other end, they're kind of out of luck.
No, it's more like first come, first serve, and it's actually, you want to have some load on the line too. So if you're next to a school, you're next to a hospital, you're next to somewhere with a big power user, you're in better shape. Because it's never going to get back to the substation. It's going to get used up right there.
But it's, typically a rural community, right, where you have a road with a bunch of these lined up down the road.
So they can,
Closer to the-
right, there's no limit to what they can connect. It's just how expensive is it to do the connection. And when they start adding those costs in, it can make it not cost effective anymore to do the project. Yes, sir.
Yeah, who's in charge or who figures up the blocks?
The blocks are already pre-established and they're on our website.
You have them already?
They're already done. We've been running the blocks for a couple of years now. And
We couldn't find it.
huh?
We couldn't find it when we were.
If you go on to the New York Sun website, you'll find, under the commercial industrial, you'll find the commercial industrial block. If you go into the residential small commercial, you'll find those blocks. They're regional blocks, they're broken up geographically by the state. There is no C&I program for commercial industrial on Long Island. That's LIPA territory and PSCG. They're discussing doing a feed-in tariff type of large system down there. You got my card? I left some cards out there. If you can't find it,
I
then.
came in the back.
Okay, well, there's some over here if you need it, and you can't find it. It's down there. If you can't find it on the website, you can call, and I'll send me an email, I'll send you the link.
When does secret kick in? At what level?
What do you mean?
Well, you don't need it for residential, right?
No, usually on the,
What size commercial?
on the residential small commercial, about 4,000 square feet of disturbance is where the secret kicks in. We found that to be about 53 kilowatts size system. So our program rules say anything 50 kW or larger, they have to do file a seeker. It's usually the short form up to 200 K, and then it's the full blown.
Thank you.
Okay.
Again, one more question, or time for questions in the end. We'll just put those all speakers, because maybe they can answer the next question. Next, I have Attorney Greg Dunn. He's going to answer all your questions from the legal side.
Before I answer any of your questions, I have a question for you, and that's, how many of you have been out recently in the market hunting to buy a car? Anyone recently tried to buy a car? Or think back on the time that you tried to buy a car. How do you get a good deal?
Negotiate.
You gotta negotiate, but how are you good at negotiating?
Do your
You
homework.
you gotta know, do your homework, know the hidden costs that the dealers have, the things that they don't tell you about. And the same is true with these solar farms. The only problem with them today is that none of us really know that much about them. You know, the lawyers and the accountants, at least myself in this area, we haven't dealt with all the issues that come up with solar farms. And so we're trying to learn them as we go. We've got New York Ag and Markets, we've got NYSERDA, we've got other people to talk to, we've got things on the website to go and look at, but my best advice for everybody is get as much knowledge about these as you can before you ever agree to some contract that they send to you in the mail and say, hey, we're gonna pay you $30,000 for 20 years, we're gonna lease 20 acres of your property, everything's gonna work out fine. I'll give you an example. What's the agricultural loss because you don't get the exemption anymore? First of all, you pay a penalty of 5 times the last exempt amount that you got year prior, whatever that was. You say your ag exemption saves you $10,000 on your farm, you're going to pay 5 times that amount, $50,000 plus 6% interest for 5 years, and it's compounding interest. So that would be on $10,000, $600. The next year it would be a little more than $600 because it'd be 10,600 times 6, and you go over 5 years, and that'll give you the amount that you actually have to pay on a penalty.
So the penalty is on the full value of your farm ag exemption, not just the portion that.
That's right, and that's another big deal. It's not just on the 20 acres that you've leased out, it's potentially on your entire farm. Okay? So that could be a big savings loss. Not only is there a penalty, but every year going forward, you don't get your exemption. So you lose another $10,000 every year. So that $30,000 contract all of a sudden is reduced down to a $20,000 contract less the penalty. So you don't make any money off the first year. You only make a little, if anything, the second year, and then you start making money after that. So that's one question that people ask that I haven't answered. Another one was depreciation that you mentioned. Depreciation is an income tax benefit. You know, the IRS is smart. They don't let us take the full value of something we purchased, farm machinery or something on our property in the first year. They make us spread it out over the years, and we get an exemption or it's an expense on our tax form, and we get that reduction. But I don't believe that depreciation works the same way with property taxes. Have you ever seen, after 20 years in your house, you think it's probably depreciated? Have you ever seen the property tax authority say, hey, you don't have to pay any more tax to your house anymore? No, so there's a question, and I'm not an accountant, so I don't know what the answer is, but in 20 years, what is this array of solar panels going to be appraised for? Okay, so let me give you one example. Recently, there was a lawsuit between the town of Palatine and the town of Canajoharie over the value of the Canajoharie waterworks system. The big reason that came up is because beech nut left. Beech nut produced so much, or used so much water that the Canajoharie waterworks system was worth a whole lot of money when beech nut was in production. But when it left, the change in value between that waterworks system was $16 million because there was no more use of water, very little water. And so I don't know what the answer is. What's this array going to be worth in 20 years? But if it's worth a lot of money, if it's worth more than a couple $1,000s per acre, which is typical on a farm, you're going to end up having a lot higher tax value. And I just don't know the answer to that question yet. But we need to know it before we enter into these contracts. A third question that was asked is what happens at the end of the useful life of this solar array panel? How do we protect ourselves in the event that the company goes bankrupt? I mean, everybody has heard of Solyndra, right? You know, our government sunk tons of money into Solyndra. It went bankrupt, and you know, we weren't too happy about our money being spent that way. Well, how do we protect ourselves from that happening here? And the only real solution that I've seen and have talked with people about is that the solar company purchases a performance bond. That obviously has to be paid for ahead of time so that down the road they don't default on that performance bond, but that there's money there to clean up, to repair, to remove when the time comes. And there's no guarantee in that. We just don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. I had a lawsuit one time with a guy that had a lawsuit against another guy. He had a nice insurance policy, and lo and behold, by the time we tried to settle that case, that insurance company went belly up. There was no money. I mean, you're always happy as a lawyer when there's an insurance policy that covers something, but the insurance company wasn't there. So those are just some of the questions that I've answered over probably the last year, since everybody in Montgomery County, lots of my friends, by the way, I'm a farmer, so I own a farm. I got the letter from, I think it was Cypress Creek, for the contract, if that's the same one that many of you guys have gotten. But I've had at least probably 10 or 15 different clients or friends call me up and say, hey Greg, what do you guys, or what do you think about this contract? What do you think I should do? Do you think this is a good way to make money? And I'm like, well, it'd be great. I mean, I think all of us farmers would like to find a way to make money on land that we weren't using, or make money on land without having to put in the work that we put in. Put in a lot of hard work and you don't make much money for your effort. But what I tell them is, I said, look, you need to spend time asking questions. If the opportunity passes you today, it's going to come back.
It's Frank's information. It's frank.mace. The E is missing after the C in his email.
Yeah, thank you. Frank Mason, I work for NYSERDA in the New York Sun program. I got a PowerPoint here if I can get through it. I don't want to really read it to you. I'll just try to hit the highlights on it. A couple things, there were some questions that I wanted to just touch on first. Before we get started, trying to get an idea of who's here. Are we all landowners? Is that what's in the room here? Is anybody a solar developer? Okay. Is anybody like an engineer or somehow in the solar, or is everybody here, got a letter in the mail and somebody wants to lease your land? Is that kind of what we got here?
No, I'm on a planning board. I'm a chairman of a planning board.
Okay, good. Planning board people? You also on the planning board? I'm on my planning board too. Okay. One thing that they mentioned a little bit, a couple people have mentioned that, and I want to do this before we get through because I don't want to forget this, about the rental rates and the point of view, the point being that what's the value of the land in 20 years? Sometimes there's a 3-year window of opportunity for them to even purchase the land or execute the lease. So you're really looking 23 years. Sometimes there's a renewal, which makes it 43 years, and a 3-year cleanup makes it 46 years. You're talking you could be talking a multi-generational kind of investment here. So it's really important that you understand it all. This is not something that you can do. You should have an attorney and an accountant really research these, look them over, make sure you have everything in there that you want to do. Our job at NYSERDA is obviously to promote green, renewable power and do it in a safe way. We're not here to have anybody being, ripped off or taken advantage of or anything like that. So. The tax exempt question about the depreciation, you can go to the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance website, look for Real Property Law 487, it's the RP 487 form. The idea of the 15-year exemption is that solar panels output decreases over time, they degrade. So it's kind of like a computer or automobile. It's not a bricks and mortar kind of improvement, so it does not appreciate the value. The 15-year window was picked because after 15 years, the system's probably close to fully depreciated at that point. Your tax assessor may argue otherwise, but there's evidence that it has depreciated a little bit in value. So that's why the 15 years. Also on that website, you can find communities that have already, in school districts that have already opted out of that RP 487 law, and you will be reassessed for the value of the solar system And there's different ways they can do that, the value, or they can actually look at the production value. How many millions of dollars a year is this thing gonna generate or whatever. But I'm not a appraiser, so I don't do that. The removal is an important thing, removal and restoration of the site. That's really an important thing to do. The question usually comes up as far as what do they do with these things? Landfills don't want them. The reason for that is they really are designed to be recycled, although there's currently not a recycle plan in place in New York. And everybody goes, well, the reason for that is there's no waste stream. The thing is so new, the recycled materials aren't even gonna come in for another 20 years. So we've got time to plan for that. In the meantime, you recycle it just like they would any other electronic device, and that's what they are. Okay? So, and the other big thing is, what happens if the developer defaults? And that's really an important question. Or if they sell it to another person. A lot of times these leases can be assigned or sold, similar to mortgages. You know, you can buy and sell them. You need to understand that. You need to understand what your liabilities are. There's people, and I'm not an attorney, but there's people that have set up separate LLCs to handle the 20 acres that they're working on, and it's subdivided, and therefore it's protected from anything else. And you know, there's options that you can do to protect yourself, and that's why we suggest you really have to have a professional review these before you sign any contract. So with that, I'm going to get into this if I can figure out how to work it. I want to make sure I do this quick. Okay, we're going to try to not stand with my back to anybody, but okay, great. Now how do I advance it? Just hit the space bar. Cool. All right. So anyway, there's something in New York called Reforming the Energy Vision, or REV, and that is Governor Cuomo promised that a few years back to build, you know, a more resilient grid, affordable energy, all that. I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to read the slides. But anyway, part of that is the Clean Energy Fund. That's a 10-year, $15 billion commitment to reshape the way the power structure in New York is. More renewable power, more clean, efficient power. We're accelerating adoption of energy efficiency things that are going to reduce loads, increase renewable energy to meet our demands, and also mobilize private sector investment. And that's key. We're trying to take the money that we are using, which is ratepayer money or taxpayer money, and leverage that with the private sector to get the most we can out of the industry. Okay, a little commercial for NYSERDA. We're nationally recognized leader for development and commercialization, implementation, advanced energy technologies. Again, reduce energy consumption, create a clean, green economy, grow diversified, renewable energy supplies. New York State is so fortunate. We have, people always used to say to us, why can't we be more like New Jersey? Why can't we be more like Massachusetts? We have one of the best renewable power grids in New York in the sense that we have hydroelectric power that's abundant. We have wind power. We have solar power. We have some other, CHP and some other smaller stuff, to the point where we're probably going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% renewable in the next couple of years, and it's just, it's good. It's all good stuff. All right. So now we're going to get into, just real quickly, I work in the New York Sun program. The New York Sun program was, of the $5 billion, $1 billion is devoted just for solar incentives. And again, there's some environmental benefits, improvements to the grid. I'm not going to get all into that. But the idea being that we're trying to build a self-sustaining solar market. By doing so, we want, at the end of the $1 billion, to be able to walk away and say, okay, solar is now competitive with grid power. It doesn't need our subsidy. It doesn't need any more taxpayer or ratepayer money associated with that. We're going to be judged based on whether or not that's true. And so far, from where we're going, we're in a, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we've had some phenomenal growth in New York State. I got involved in solar in around 2010, and since then, the program's grown significantly. We had 575% increase between 2012 and 2015. A lot of that was in small systems on people's houses and whatnot. We processed last year alone over 18,000 projects in New York State that we helped subsidize to do it. And we got 615 megawatts of power installed. One of them was my house, I did mine last year. Approximately 100,000 homes. Okay, created over 8,000 new jobs in New York State. Yeah. My background as a construction worker. Solar is construction, that's what it is. It's mostly, it's an electrical technology, and New York State is now ranked 4th in the nation for solar workers. So that's pretty significant improvement. In 2010, we were laughed at when we told them we could probably do 100 projects a month. And they said, that's impossible, you'll never get to that. So anyway, we have what's known as a megawatt block incentive program. And what a megawatt block is as applications come in, we fill up a block of an incentive block. We have it on a real-time dashboard on our computer. And we total the wattage of the systems, the capacity of the systems. When we reach a certain level, it automatically ratchets down the incentives to the next level. And that's how we're moving towards this time when there's no incentive. So we also do other things. We do a lot of soft cost reduction. And a lot of people don't understand what soft cost is. Soft cost is your permitting, your engineering, your design fees. We're trying to do a lot of work with code officials and town officials. And we have what's called the workforce development. We do education where we do outreach. Any organization can reach out to us and sponsor a training. We have online trainings in different topics. And we'll send professional people that are there, that are experts in their field to do everything from first responder training for firefighters to code officials to you name it. We'll do all of that. We've set aside about $4 million of this just to do training. Okay, and we try to do some consumer education. That's hard. That's kind of like what I'm doing tonight. And it's hard because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And you know, when you really look at it, there's some excellent tax benefits to putting this stuff on your own home. But clearly what we're here for more tonight is what we're looking at the solar farm and stuff. If anybody has questions about your individual home, you know, I can answer those too. Okay, so something really strange happened in 2015 in New York State, and they came out with what's known, the Public Service Commission came out with what's known as community distributed generation, which is a fancy word for community solar or shared solar or other things. And what that does, that allows somebody that's, say, on the 20th floor of a 30-story building and has a meter for their apartment to now have solar without physically putting it on their building. Great idea. Good idea for condos. It's a good idea for a lot of places. It's great up in the Adirondacks where maybe you're restricted, you can't cut trees, things like that. You are now able to virtually have the solar on your house, and the utility company credits your bill as if it was on your house, which means you get credit for the power it generates. You also get credit for the transmission. Everybody gets those delivery charges on your bill. You know, what do they deliver? You know, they haven't dropped anything off. You know, this is it. So all that stuff goes through together. Now, those projects are what you probably got letters about, and the way the community solar or shared solar works. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. The net metering structure. The way net metering structure, they used to say, oh, your meter runs backwards. Your meter really doesn't run backwards. What happens is your meter measures the power generation versus your power consumption. So my solar system at home, when my wife and I are at work, and there's just a dog there, and he doesn't run the air conditioner. So any excess power made during the day goes out into the grid, and our neighbors use it. Okay, and it keeps track of what that is. And then at night when we come home and we turn on the TV and we make dinner and we do whatever else we want to do, and we're using power back, it keeps track of our usage. The net difference is what we get billed for. I didn't offset 100% of my use. I did 60% of my use, but basically, you know, it doesn't really matter. I'm getting part of it. I got some tax credits out of it, and it's working really fine. But yes, sir.
Yeah, so is that kilowatt per kilowatt that?
Yep.
Oh, okay, it's not like you sell it wholesale and buy it back
No.
retail?
There is something called a true update, and that's on your home. If you produce too much power during the course of the year, once a year the utility will pay you for the excess generation. but they're gonna pay you at the avoided cost rate, which is a nice word for the wholesale rate. So they're gonna charge you 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and they're gonna pay you 2 cents for your excess. So it's important that you don't over-design your systems, and it's also important that you understand the true update, because you can only move it one time. So somewhere around April 1st is a good time, because your excess power that you generate in the summer, you want to be able to use through the winter, okay? So, but that's net metering. Net metering is how, remote net metering is how all these solar farms work. They get a group of people that come in, they buy up the solar. I gotta watch my time here. I don't want to go over. Okay, so basically you have on-site panels. Okay, you have customers and homes, and the subscribers, the utilities actually credit the different bills. It's kind of a nice setup. Each community solar has a sponsor. The sponsor can be not-for-profit, can be municipality, can be anybody they want. There's rules as to how the memberships go together. But a developer, a solar developer, which is probably who mailed you out the letter, is going to come in. They're going to set the system up. They're going to sell shares, or they're going to lease shares to customers. And then they're going to pay back. Just like you select your energy provider now, they decoupled your energy provider from your National Grid bill. I think we're National Grid here, right? Okay. So you may have, who knows what company you're using. But very similar kind of thing, except you won't see those delivery charges. All your net meter stuff, there's no delivery charges associated. There's no sales tax associated. It's as if it was generated at your own house and you consumed it yourself. So that's the beautiful thing. So, all right, so let me get going here. Okay, how large are solar farms? There's a 2 megawatt limit in New York State to put up a farm.
They're changing it to 5. The interconnect meetings that are going on at NYSERDA and the PSC
Right.
and with utilities is moving that up to 5.
It's on the table to move it to 5, but currently it's 2, right? It's 2. It's part of what's called the standard interconnection requirements in New York State. So currently it's 2, roughly 6 acres per megawatt approximately, okay? Plus some access roads, that's where the 20 acre feet is in. Now, you can move it to 5, but if the utility lines can't handle 5, if the utility lines can only handle 200 kW, that's all you're gonna get. Okay? So this is the other thing, other part of the site is the site assessment of what those lines can take. How far are you from the substation? Do you have 3-phase power? What's the voltage of the line going down your street? A lot of New York State is only 5 kV primary. It's like running an entire town on a 1/2-inch water line. Not gonna work. So if it's 35 kV, if it's 13.8, better shot if you have it. So these are things you can do. You can check to find out the voltages of the lines and kind of get that kind of, but anyway. Okay, so where can you put these? You put them on the ground, obviously, you put them on rooftops. The key to all of the virtual net metering is you have to be in the same ISO zone, which is New York State Independent System Operators, which is it's a pretty interesting thing. So that as long as you're putting into the grid in a certain geographical area, I'm not sure what zone you are in here, but I'm like in the Albany area a lot. So from Albany to like Saratoga Springs, that's kind of an ISO zone. So they're pretty big areas, the ISO zones that you have to choose from. Okay, so they're saying total development costs $4 to $6 million before incentives. What there is for incentives, there's a 30% federal income tax credit to the developer. 30% of the cost they get back on their income taxes. So they can monetize the tax credits by luring banks and investors in to help finance the deal. They get the tax credit, they avoid paying federal income taxes. In addition to that, they have a 5-year depreciation allowance. They can fully depreciate the system in 5 years. Those are what lure in that private investment. Now, those are federal tax credits. New York is leveraging those federal dollars to kind of do that, to bring it into New York. Okay? That's revenue and jobs that are coming into New York using the federal money. It's still coming out of the taxpayers, and I'm one of them, so I get it. But if we don't take it, somebody else will. So, all right? So, let's see. This is, you can get these slides there, but the responsibilities of the sponsors. They have to manage the portfolio of customers, basically, allocate the credits, change them once a month. If people don't pay that they're supposed to pay, they can sell it to somebody else. This is a really good deal for the lease companies because unlike door-to-door solar where they're putting it on a rooftop, if the customer fails to pay them, they have a stranded asset on the rooftop. With a solar farm, if the customer that they subscribe to didn't pay the bill that month, they can turn around and sell that power to a different customer the following month. So that's pretty good. All right. So I'm running a little bit over, so I'm going to try to cut this short a little bit. All right. Municipalities are great users of power, and sometimes they can be part of these shared solar themselves. They can get in where they have commercial buildings, they have highway garages, they may have a water plant, they may have a sewer plant, they may have all these kind of buildings. There could be a firehouse, it could be a school, elementary school. There's a separate program for schools called the K-Solar program, which is designed to take care of schools. All right, but again, we have various people can run these, and I'm gonna, like I said, this is a little bit too long for what we're trying to do, so I'm gonna cut it short here a little bit. And I want to get the questions. Okay, understanding the end of life, 25-year plus, what happens to the system at the end of that life? You got to know what you can and can't do. They added some slides on me, and I think they went over it. All right, interconnection. Interconnection we talked about really quickly. That's what the grid can handle. The grid can't handle. It depends on what the infrastructure's in place. If it's not there, it's not there, okay? So you're gonna need legal, you're gonna need accounting services for people to help you get through this. The real property tax exemption, the real property tax law 487, that's the one you need to know. The decommissioning information. The other thing that runs into solar too is the SEQA process. State Environmental Quality Review Act applies. Typically on the solar farms, it's a long form, it's a long process that has to be taken care of. The applicants have to do that. That's usually a declaration of a lead agency. Typically, it is the local town municipality will step in and take lead. If they don't, then the next person would be probably the county, and if the county doesn't, then the state. So, but that all has to go through that process. Kind of an example of the thing. We talked a little bit about foundations earlier. A lot of the foundations are driven now. They're not concrete bases. They come in with like a pile driver type setup, and they'll put them in so they can pull them out easier. All right, just some information about membership. I don't think any of you people are looking to be members, but it is something to consider if you are going to lease it on your land. Say, hey, can I be a member, and what are you going to charge me per kilowatt hour for my own power? Definitely something to talk to them about. Escalation are important. Like I said, escalation on the lease. You need to know all that. Okay, so PV Trainers Network, the green bags out there, we do education for lots of different things. And like I said, I apologize, there's too many slides for what we need tonight. But take some questions quick. I ran over a little bit, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
That 2 megawatt limit, that's for the total for the project? Or
that's the AC capacity right now that you can interconnect with the grid maximum. But the gentleman over here mentioned that they're talking about raising it to 5.
Right. Can you group these together on the same parcel of land and it's just a different connection at a different point?
If the grid can handle it. You could have multiple meters. You could have two 2 kWs right next to each other with 2 separate meters, if that power line can handle it. The problem that you're going to find is that the limitations of the power line are going to determine the size of the system.
Okay, so if you have a 3-phase line going down some route, and the ones closest to the substation, they put in first, the people down to the other end, they're kind of out of luck.
No, it's more like first come, first serve, and it's actually, you want to have some load on the line too. So if you're next to a school, you're next to a hospital, you're next to somewhere with a big power user, you're in better shape. Because it's never going to get back to the substation. It's going to get used up right there.
But it's typically a rural community, right, where you have a road with a bunch of these lined up down the road.
So they can,
closer to the
right, there's no limit to what they can connect. It's just how expensive is it to do the connection. And when they start adding those costs in, it can make it not cost effective anymore to do the project. Yes, sir.
Yeah, who's in charge or who figures up the blocks?
The blocks are already pre-established and they're on our website.
You have them already?
They're already done. We've been running the blocks for a couple of years now. And,
We couldn't find it.
huh?
We couldn't find it when we were.
If you go on to the New York Sun website, you'll find, under the commercial industrial, you'll find the commercial industrial block. If you go into the the residential small commercial, you'll find those blocks. They're regional blocks, they're broken up geographically by the state. There is no C&I program for commercial industrial on Long Island. That's LIPA territory and PSCG. They're discussing doing a feed-in tariff type of large system down there. You got my card? I left some cards out there. If you can't find it,
I
then.
came in the back.
Okay, well, there's some over here if you need it, and you can't find it. Who's down there? If you can't find it on the website, you can call, and I'll send, or send me an email, I'll send you a link.
When does secret kick in? At what level?
What do you mean?
Well, you don't need it for residential, right?
No, usually on the,
What size commercial?
on the residential small commercial, about 4,000 square feet of disturbance is where the secret kicks in. We found that to be about 53 kilowatts size system. So our program rules say anything 50 kW or larger, they have to do file a seeker. It's usually the short form up to 200 K, and then it's the full blown. Thank you. Okay.
Again, one more question, or time for questions in the end. We'll just put those all speakers, but maybe they can answer the next question. Next, I have Attorney Greg Dunn, who will answer all your questions from the legal side.
Before I answer any of your questions, I have a question for you, and that's, how many of you have been out recently in the market hunting to buy a car? Anyone recently tried to buy a car? Or think back on a time that you tried to buy a car. How do you get a good deal?
Negotiate.
You gotta negotiate, but how are you good at negotiating?
Do your
You gotta know, do your homework, know the hidden costs that the dealers have, the things that they don't tell you about. And the same is true with these solar farms. The only problem with them today is that none of us really know that much about them. You know, the lawyers and the accountants, at least myself in this area, we haven't dealt with all the issues that come up with solar farms. And so we're trying to learn them as we go. We've got New York Ag and Markets, we've got NYSERDA, we've got other people to talk to, we've got things on the website to go and look at, but my best advice for everybody is get as much knowledge about these as you can before you ever agree to some contract that they send to you in the mail and say, hey, we're going to pay you $30,000 for 20 years, we're going to lease 20 acres of your property, everything's going to work out fine. I'll give you an example. What's the agricultural loss because you don't get the exemption anymore? First of all, you pay a penalty of 5 times the last exempt amount that you got the year prior, whatever that was. You say your ag exemption saves you $10,000 on your farm, you're going to pay 5 times that amount, $50,000 plus 6% interest for 5 years, and it's compounding interest. So that would be on $10,000, $600. The next year it would be a little more than $600 because it'd be 10,600 times 6, and you go over 5 years, and that'll give you the amount that you actually have to pay in a penalty.
So the penalty is on the full value of your farm ag exemption, not just the portion that.
That's right, and that's another big deal. It's not just on the 20 acres that you've leased out, it's potentially on your entire farm. Okay, so that could be a big savings loss. Not only is there a penalty, but every year going forward, you don't get your exemption. So you lose another $10,000 every year. So that $30,000 contract all of a sudden is reduced down to a $20,000 contract less the penalty. So you don't make any money off the first year. You only make a little, if anything, the second year, and then you start making money after that. So that's one question that people ask that I answer. Another one was depreciation that you mentioned. Depreciation is an income tax benefit. You know, the IRS is smart. They don't let us take the full value of something we've purchased, farm machinery or something on our property in the first year. They make us spread it out over the years, and we get an exemption it's an expense on our tax form, and we get that reduction. But I don't believe that depreciation works the same way with property taxes. Have you ever seen, after 20 years in your house, you think it's probably depreciated? Have you ever seen the property tax authority say, hey, you don't have to pay any more tax, your house is worth more? No, so there's a question, and I'm not an accountant, so I don't know what the answer is, but in 20 years, what is this array of solar panels going to be appraised for? Okay, so let me give you one example. Recently, there was a lawsuit between the town of Palatine and the town of Canajoharie over the value of the Canajoharie waterworks system. The big reason that came up is because Beechnut left. Beechnut produced so much, or used so much water that the Canajoharie waterworks system was worth a whole lot of money when Beechnut was in production. But when it left, the change in value between that waterworks system was $16 million because there was no more use of water, very little water. And so I don't know what the answer is. What's this array going to be worth in 20 years? But if it's worth a lot of money, if it's worth more than a couple $1,000s per acre, which is typical on a farm, you're going to end up having a lot higher tax value. And I just don't know the answer to that question yet, but we need to know it before we enter into these contracts. A third question that was asked is what happens at the end of the useful life of this solar array panel? How do we protect ourselves in the event that the company goes bankrupt? I mean, everybody has heard of Solyndra, right? You know, our government sunk tons of money into Solyndra. It went bankrupt, and you know, we weren't too happy about our money being spent that way. Well, how do we protect ourselves from that happening here? And the only real solution that I've seen and have talked with people about is that the solar company purchases a performance bond. That obviously has to be paid for ahead of time so that down the road they don't default on that performance bond, but that there's money there to clean up, to repair, to remove when the time comes. And there's no guarantee in that. We just don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. I had a lawsuit one time with a guy that had a lawsuit against another guy. He had a nice insurance policy, and lo and behold, by the time we tried to settle that case, that insurance company went belly up. There was no money. I mean, you're always happy as a lawyer when there's an insurance policy to cover something, but insurance company wasn't there. So those are just some of the questions that you know I've answered over probably the last year, since everybody in Montgomery County, lots of my friends. By the way, I'm a farmer, so I own a farm. I got the letter from, I think it was Cypress Creek, for the contract, if that's the same one that many of you guys have gotten. But I've had at least probably 10 or 15 different clients or friends call me up and say, hey Greg, what do you guys, or what do you think about this contract? What do you think I should do? Do you think this is a good way to make money? And I'm like, well, it'd be great. I mean, I think all of us farmers would like to find a way to make money on land that we weren't using, or make money on land without having to put in the work that we put in. You know, put in a lot of hard work and you don't make much money for your effort. But what I tell them is, I said, look, you need to spend time asking questions. If the opportunity passes you today, it's going to come back tomorrow. This is not a passing fad. This energy fad is not passing, unless there are real problems with it and it doesn't work out. If not, I think you're going to have an opportunity down the road, and if you have that, you're in a much better bargaining position to deal with these contracts. for instance, when you know that the contract isn't worth $600,000 because of what it's gonna do to your ag exemption, you can negotiate a higher price. Say, I want more money. You can negotiate different terms, shorter terms, longer terms, guarantees, performance bonds, all these types of things. And I think that maybe there's some lawyers around who dealt with us a lot, but I think most of us are probably just learning, as this is coming about. And so I can say this, I've learned a lot just from questions people have asked me or thoughts they've come up with, and I'm like, I didn't even think about that. Go put that down, try to remember that, and put that into a contract or try to negotiate the terms more favorable to yourself. Another thing I wanted to raise too are potential legal issues that you might face because you decide to put in some of these panels on the farm. First of all, you have to be careful about what's going to happen to your neighbor's property. Is it going to diminish the value? How many of you have seen one of these solar farms? Nearby or in other states? What's that? All over?
There's one in the area.
Okay. I've seen some really large ones down in Pennsylvania, and I guess I was surprised how they were fairly attractive. They were uniform, they were organized, they were clean, things like that. But boy, did it change the landscape. The side of that hill. I mean, no longer was it an agricultural landscape. It was very commercialized, and I mean, the extent of that array was surprising to me. So I serve as the village attorney for Nelliston and for the town of Palatine currently, and we've been throwing around a lot of suggestions about how to protect neighboring properties and how to prevent nuisance lawsuits, setting reasonable setbacks, making sure that there are buffer zones, making sure that there are trees placed, looking carefully at where the placement is, not just where the solar company may want it, but somewhere where your neighbor can't see it. And at least it's my opinion that these things should probably be determined on a case-by-case basis, on a land-by-land basis, and that there's no perfect one solution fits all. So,
Greg, I just want to let you know that the New York State Fire Code
yes,
requires at least a 20-foot setback for any vegetation. So if you plan on putting trees in or bushes, they have to have at least 20 years clearance for the fire company.
okay, and that's from
New York State Fire Code.
the New York State Fire Code. I know also that there are a number of local towns and so forth that have started putting together either some local laws. They may even have it in their zoning code or something that talk about the solar farms and about the specifics. So depending on where you live, it could be very different than the neighboring town or county. So you should probably, talk to some of your government officials, your local officials, and see what's happening and what ideas they have. Yes,
Well,
ma'am?
I've spoken to many attorneys, they don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And also, it sounds extremely discouraging. You have to look at all these, I thought the company that rented or leased the property from you were worried about the 20-foot setback from the road, and you have nothing to do
Well,
with it.
uh,
And the road for the fire trucks, see, that has nothing
Yeah.
to do with you.
they do,
Uh-huh.
that you will find provisions like that that protect you in the contracts. But you have to read the contracts carefully. First of all, if you're new to it, you don't know what to look for.
Well, I'm not
Right.
stupid.
Right. No, that's right. So you use common sense and you read through and you go, hey, it doesn't say anything about this, okay? It's a learning process.
Yeah,
But that's why-
We
yeah.
might have to learn for another 10 years and let's not get involved.
I
Who
mean,
knows the answers to this?
well, there's risk in everything you do, right?
Yeah,
well,
I'm
so-
leaving now, so I guess
Right.
that's risky.
But I guess one of the things I would tell
Don't make
people is I
sense.
say, what's the risk-benefit analysis?
Mhm.
What is the risk? Is there really a risk that in 30 years they're gonna go bankrupt
Yeah,
and leave
it's
that
very
there,
possible.
that's probably very
That
possible,
is a
right?
special thing right
Okay,
there, the
so-
bankruptcy.
Right, so you don't know what the future holds, but is there a big risk that this is gonna be a nuisance to your neighbor if it's kind of set in the valley and no one sees it from the road? No, you know, it might be perfect.
I don't really care about my neighbor, he never cared about me.
Well, you might not care about it, but if you get slapped with a lawsuit, you're gonna be upset about it.
I don't think I care, but I don't think the company that took.
Well,
not
hey,
me.
you know, people ask me all the time, they say, hey, can I be held liable for that? And I say, no, but you can be sued.
Sued
And
for
it'll
what?
cost you a lot of money.
Against a couple of years.
Yeah, but that happens, you have to understand also the legal process, and that you can be sued even if you're not found liable for something
Oh,
or
what about if
responsible.
you're dead?
Well, then your estate can be sued, and your children, and if you don't care about your neighbor, maybe you don't care about your children, I don't know.
No, I don't.
So you're in good shape, you know, go ahead and do it.
I've been looking at this
Does,
for a year now, and it's, where are the answers? What do you do? Wait
Well,
another 10?
Well,
I'm
let me
dead.
say this, I mean, I've reviewed some of those contracts, I haven't reviewed them in great depth, but some of them are workable. You know, for a farmer who would like to
I'm
make
not a
some extra
farmer.
money, but let me just give you an example. You know, most farmers I know have to have a second job and/or a spouse
Yeah,
or
I
somebody that's
understand.
working a second job to make ends meet. Farming's a tough way to make a living anymore. But if you could dedicate 20 acres that you just had in pasture you weren't doing anything with to this solar array and make an extra $30,000 pop, that would be a nice thing.
I think it's great, do it.
Yeah, and I want to encourage
But if they
that
all of
opportunity to
this
go
up
out
tonight,
with
they would be
caution.
afraid to do it.
What's that?
I would be discouraged to do anything now after the conversations tonight. I didn't see any encouragement.
Well, actually, that's good. That's good.
Probably
Maybe
is.
now you'll think about it before you make a
I've
decision,
been
right?
thinking
Now
about it a
you-
year.
Right. Well, yeah, but
Ain't
if
long
you,
enough, another 10.
yeah, but have you talked to anybody during that year?
I've talked to several lawyers, they don't know what I'm talking about.
does the state have any
Yes, it's
regulations? Being the state is putting this all together kind of, and is behind it.
I
Do
know
they have any
all about
regulations
it.
that they have formulated for the rest of us out here in the community to follow?
I haven't seen any state regulations.
I'm not sure what you mean by regulation.
Well, what I'm
Zoning?
saying is, you know, we have a planning board, we have
Right,
regulations.
Okay.
Why doesn't the state have some kind of regulations on the
Okay.
size, the setbacks, and the exposure, and all those things before we start into this? Because
There
we're
are some
running
things-
blind.
Yeah, there are some things that, just to understand, New York is what's called a home rule state. The authority is on the local level, because they believe that the local people can make the best decisions about what the local laws are. Now, that being said, there are state codes, okay, the fire codes, the building codes, all apply, okay, but zoning is on a local level.
Yeah, so this is on the zoning. This is-
It really
that's-
is.
This is,
Now,
this
there's
is a
some-
planning board issue.
There's some
Hey,
samples, there's
Hey,
some sample
Village
of those
Nelliston
documents out
has
there.
no zoning. So what do you do there?
You have to start some. You'll have to,
That's right.
you've gotta do that,
That's
all.
right, and
But
that's
it's-
what's happening. That's what people are doing, but that's the stage it's in right now.
There's some samples out there, some draft documents
I
and
know.
things like that, but
I've-
it's all gotta
I've
be done
seen
on the local level.
I've seen, I mean,
Yeah.
I've been going over this stuff for the last
Right.
6 months,
Yeah.
trying to figure out some of it so that we can get something in place, because once you open the door to the horse's barn, guess where he's gonna be? He's gonna be gone.
Yep.
And we're gonna be, and the rest of the community is gonna be stuck with it. And with us, the planning board has the thing that we have to look out for the safety and welfare of the community. That's our baby, that's what we have to do. And it's pretty tough when we don't have any kind of things coming from the state.
We have training, we have all those things out
Yeah,
there.
I understand all that, but training doesn't do it. We gotta do it. And we need to have some kind of guidance, other than just somebody coming in and saying, you know, you can do this and you can do this. Just like you're saying, right now, we've brought up a lot of those issues that you're trying to delve with, okay? And got the same thing as this lady got in response, okay?
What planning board are you on?
Town of Kansas.
Oh, Kansas.
But, you
Well,
know,
here's the thing. People, you have to make decisions, right? You have, eventually have to make decisions. But you've got to make it for your own area, okay? And it may differ from the next. And so what I'm saying is, hey, I think it's the town of Root, Bob, do you know? Town of Root, they have something on this, don't they? Already in place.
We got a moratorium.
that's what we got.
So there's a moratorium. Moratorium's for 1 year? How long?
Like 6 months, ours
Okay,
is.
6 months, okay. Why the moratorium? Because they want time to think this through.
That's what we're doing.
You know, all right, but the goal of the moratorium is that you make a decision. You know, at the end of the time, you make a decision as to what you're gonna do, and I think we're all faced with making a decision. I think that you can eliminate a lot of the risk that's involved with these solar farms, but you also have to say, look, this just isn't gonna work in every situation. We're gonna have some people who are mad because they can't have it on their land or their farm. Why? Because it'll create a nuisance situation for their neighbors, or something like that. And I mean, there are just some tough decisions that are before us and faced with us. And if you get in a room of this size, I mean, try to come to a decision. That's a tough thing, you know, and getting all the details. So what I would say is try to get involved by going to some of your local meetings and, you know, trying to get this matter on the agenda and seeing if your planning board and your board will make a decision and get something in place so that you can move forward. You know, because everybody I've heard is kind of in the limbo stage.
Now, up at Montgomery County, the county supervisor, his whole family owns the land everywhere.
Yep.
And they gonna put these things everywhere. Call him on the phone, I don't know what to tell you. Your son-in-law happens to own that land that you're putting out. Don't you know anything about it? No, I don't. Nobody's gonna tell you anything. It's word of mouth.
Well, my lawyer tells me the advantages to them, so.
Is the
The advantages to the company, yeah.
Well, does any of us know the question? How much are they making off of these panels? Does anyone know that?
No, nobody.
Pardon me?
Okay, none of us know how much they're making off of it.
It's pretty easy, you can pretty much calculate the kilowatt hour output.
Okay,
And once you know the kilowatt hour output, you can kind of get an idea what they're gonna sell it for. And then you'll know their total revenue, right? There's a formula that we have in New York that we can approximate. It's still weather dependent, but it's gonna be based on 50 years of weather data.
You
So
know
we
that-
can pretty much come up with what it's gonna generate.
They're gonna make a profit. They aren't doing this just for the fun of it. This is
Exactly.
just for
Right,
the
but-
tax benefits and that type of thing.
but again, just with the car salesman issue, if a guy comes in and tells you $10,000, and you know he only paid $6 for it, you know you got $4,000 to negotiate, so you have some negotiation power. That's what I'm telling people, get that. You know, if people can get the information as to what these systems are really making, that would help, at least help me if I were making a call and saying, hey, I have a client who wants to enter into this, but look, here's what we're gonna pay. And they tell you no, and I say, hey, I know you're making a profit off of it, here's what your profit is, here's your margin, we're gonna do it for this is a great location, give my guy a little bit of a break and you've got a deal. You know, but if you don't know that information, you don't have that ability to do it.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
I have to do a budget every year on this in real property. These are real property, are they not?
Once they're attached, they become real property. Okay, I mean,
Then either assess them, if we decide, we haven't opted out at the moment,
yeah,
so we can either, we can assess them or do a payment of taxes.
are you asking the question?
I'm asking a question.
Yeah, you have both of those options. You have both of those options, but I believe, and I don't know the exact time period, but there's some time period to do it. The solar company has to file some type of application, and you have a certain time period to either say, hey, we opt out and you're not gonna get the exemption, or we want you to enter into one of those pilot agreements, something like that. haven't
think
written.
the time has passed for opting out,
In relation to somebody who's bringing in a solar farm?
well, we don't, right now, we have a moratorium,
Okay.
6 months with a possible 6 months.
I don't think, I can't remember the details on that, but I don't think you're past the time.
We can still,
Yeah, I could be wrong on that, but I don't.
when it's more.
I can answer that question. I'm Amanda Bearcroft with the county. The moratorium's fine. Usually most companies, once they have site plan approval, they are no longer, if you can still opt out after that, but they will no longer, that certain project won't be effective anymore because they've already had site plan approval. But prior to that, even if they came to the planning board and they're still waiting for approval and you opt out or do whatever, they would then still have to follow along because they never got approval from the planning board or however you do it in municipality.
Thank you.
All right, we got you guys thinking, that's why I had this event for. Next, I have Farm Credit East. Rob is gonna come up and tell you their part, they played in solar farm. Yep.
I think so.
That's what we came up with here at the town hall. We went to 12, 15 questions that we crossed out of there. We use theirs as a graph. And we're gonna look at those based on those.
All right, I'm Rob Yerkowitz from Farm Credit East in, over in Cobleskill. Farm Credit, for those of you who don't know, is an agricultural and rural lender. So we loan money to farms, all different kinds of industries, as well as rural homeowners, okay? So, so if you don't have a mortgage, I guess you can just tune out for the next 10 minutes. But I feel like most of us, and again, this is going to be from Farm Credit's perspective, which is obviously going to be a little bit different than maybe mortgages from a different lender. But pretty much these mortgages are pretty standard throughout New York State. So just going to go over some things real quick with you. So a lease, just by definition, it's a binding legal document that impacts the real estate. Whoever the lease is with has an interest in that property. You may own it, but they have an interest. It can restrict what you're able to do with the real estate for the term of that lease. Okay, so we've had a few leases, I think through Cypress Creek, that a couple of borrowers have sent along, and we've had our legal folks look at them. And it really does restrict, in some cases, what you can do with that property and the adjacent properties. And I'm not telling you anything that other folks haven't already told you today, but worth repeating. Tried to bold it and put it in a different color, but I think everybody who stood up here, Matt from Ag and Market said that, have a professional look at these things. And the bank's interest is not always going to be the same interest as your own. So a lot of times they do tie together quite nicely, but they're not always going to be the same. So when you get one of these lease promotions, whatever you want to call it, in the mail, you get excited about it, don't forget about the mortgage that you've signed. A lot of times that's not the first thing you think of, and why would it be? So a farm credit mortgage actually prohibits a borrower from entering into a lease on that real property that's encumbered by the mortgage for a period of greater than a year. So it doesn't mean you can never do it, it just means the mortgage you've signed prohibits it, and you've got to run that through the lender and get written approval before you're ever allowed to actually lease that property. Now, the reasons we would do that are obvious, I think. We don't want people leasing mortgage property that we have an interest in, a security interest in, for purposes that we would deem irresponsible in some way. So we've looked at these leases and rental arrangements. The traditional one, land and building lease. You own your land, you rent it out to a local farmer. You own a farm, you rent that out to somebody. cell towers, wind towers, solar, this just happens to be the next thing. We've looked at these for many, many years. So just real quick and easy, how the process works. A borrower needs to request an approval of the lease before they enter into any lease agreements. Legal folks from the bank. And again, this is Farm Credit's perspective, but probably very much the same for any lender. By submitting a written lease, this is what the company's proposing. We put it in front of our legal folks. They tell us what conflicts and issues arise initially, and that's sometimes where the negotiations can start between that landowner and the proposed developer. What we look at, what your mortgage company is going to look at, does it impact the ongoing farming operation? Or if it's not a farm, if it just happens to be a large chunk of ground that the solar company is looking for, how does that impact the ongoing operations and value? Environmental impact, of course. You got to make sure that there isn't anything going on that property that's going to be an environmental detriment, and all of a sudden the value of that property goes the other way. And then again, impact of the value, resaleability of that property. If you do something that's going to make that property worth less money and potentially put you underwater on your mortgage, that's a problem. I said it again. So if you do go through the normal procedures, send in that lease document, our legal folks look at it, we kind of look at it from a credit side and say, okay, it makes sense, why wouldn't it make sense, right? It's cash flow, it's revenue for that business, if it makes that business stronger, and there's no other environmental issues or issues that make that property worth less, of course we're going to approve that. And then usually what happens is we look at the final negotiated lease agreement before it's signed yet, but the final version of it, because there's usually Greg would probably say there's 25 versions before there's a final. We provide some means of legal acknowledgement of the lease. In the past, we've done non-disturbance agreements, which work out really well for the lender. We're not really subordinating anything. We're just saying that we acknowledge that that property is, or that tower, that solar panel, whatever it is on the property. We will not disturb it. If we foreclose and own it someday, that goes with the property. All kinds of stuff like that. We would generally obtain some sort of assignment of leases and rents. So if that company is going to pay you $60,000 a year to lease your property, doesn't mean we're going to necessarily say that company's paying us directly, but we may. In a default situation, we want to be able to say, all right, solar leasing company, send us the money to get that borrower current on their mortgage. So if we don't get the assignment of lease and rents, we can't invoke that. Also, some consideration may be required, such as principal reduction on the loan balance. Let's say we say it does have an impact on the resaleability of that property. Where it's situated, where it's located. Any reasonable buyer is probably not going to pay as much as we had last appraised that property for. So we still may approve it. However, we're going to say you got to pay down that mortgage. Now, what can happen? Gas leases, when that was going on back in the Southern Tier, 5, 7, 8 years ago, there was big sign-on bonuses, okay? So they would get these sign-on bonuses, you could apply that to your mortgage, and life goes on, everybody's happy. Now with these solar deals, the ones that I've looked at, there hasn't really been any sign-on bonus, or it hasn't been anything significant. When you were talking about gas leases in this Marcellus Shale territory, you were talking about $500, $1,000 an acre sometimes to sign up. Before they drill, before there's any royalties. Whereas this, they're not really talking about upfront money. So that can be a potential issue that we run into as a lender, being able to approve this. I've had a lot of people ask this, and what is the impact on real estate values? I hate to say it, it's more non-answers for you tonight, but it just all depends. There's no way you can say that every single lease is going to increase the value of that property or decrease the value of that property. I think of an income stream as a real positive, but at the same time, some buyers, you could say downstate buyers looking to get that place in the country, green, undisturbed, they may not care about that income stream. That may not be their motivation, and they just want to see it totally green, undisturbed, green fields, wildlife, and that sort of thing. So to them, it could be, I'm not going to buy that property. Now you just eliminated maybe half the potential buyers for that property. So it really, really all depends. just a little bit about Farm Credit, a cheap plug while I'm here. But that's what we do. We lend money to farmers. We lend money to folks who want to live in the country, have a property that may not be conforming to that 2 acres on a lot with a drilled well and a white picket fence kind of thing. So, any questions? Nobody has mortgages, right? You guys are all in better shape than I am.
How will this affect the property near the solar units that are gonna be up? I mean, as far as you're concerned?
From a value perspective?
Yes.
I hate to say it, but I think, anybody want to answer that for me?
It depends.
Thanks. Sorry, I mean, it just really does depend.
Well, I'm just saying that I'm sitting beside a 20-acre lot with a solar field into it, and my house is across the road from it, and I want to sell it.
I would say, my personal opinion, I'm not an appraiser, I would say it has a detriment.
Sure.
Good. Thank you.
Right. To wrap up the names for speakers, I have Amanda from Montgomery County Business Development. Yep. There you go.
Okay, so I apologize if you've seen this presentation before. I presented it a couple months ago to local municipalities and planning boards in regards to how do you zone for this. So you're all here because, like we've already said, I'm probably going to touch on a lot of the same subjects, but you've probably gotten letters about someone interested in leasing your property, whether you're just a residential homeowner with a large acreage of land, a farmer, whether you're interested in putting this on your roof, putting some other sort of array on your property, and these come in all different sizes and forms. I mean, you've got a big solar farm up on the top, you've got your standard panel, which can be on a residential, your rooftop, and they can even go on accessory structures, parking garages, really anywhere that the structure can hold it. So this came about around last year when all the municipalities were really getting hit hard with a lot of these larger solar farm developments coming in, wanting to take large acreage of farmland to develop on. And we first started working with the town of Florida on a project that was proposing to take up around 80 acres of land. And once that hit, we got 2 other proposals within, I believe it was 2 or 3 months time. And it was just overwhelming, like a lot of you, how do we handle this? How do we zone for it? So the town of Florida put a moratorium on development for solar farms. It didn't stop people from putting them on their roofs or a smaller array in your backyard. It was more focused on how do we handle these larger arrays. And a lot of the concerns they have are your concerns, is how do we decommission this when the company could potentially be gone in not only 20, 25 years, but what happens if they don't exist in 5 years from now? They were concerned about setbacks, especially when you have a bigger array. We don't want this right up on the side of the road. We don't want people looking at them while they're driving on a 55-mile-per-hour road. Causes all these concerns. Even on residential, we don't know how they're assessed, what if they're negatively affecting your property or positively, but you also don't want to have a neighbor install it and it only has to go by the accessory structure setback, and so maybe 10 feet from your property line. We're also concerned with things like glare, special permitting uses, buffers, and how fire departments deal with these on roofs. So since that time, Town of Florida has adopted solar zoning code. Town of Amsterdam followed suit not too long ago. And they're actually, although they passed it, they're already looking to readjust the setbacks for residential property because of solar that was potentially going in there. So just a touch on what I already talked about. I mean, this is an example of, you can't really see it, I apologize, but it's a residential property. There's the fence, And you can see that one of the neighbors has solar panels directly looking at their neighbor's property. We've got, this is an example of an airport that installed solar panels, and when the sun was at a certain angle, they would reflect off of the panels, and this caused planes coming and going could not see the runway. Since then, they've had to tilt the adjustment, but that wasn't thought of prior to putting those in. We have the issue when it comes to local fire departments. How do they deal with these? The zoning code does not override what's already set by Ag and Markets and New York State Fire Code, but it is nice for local planning boards and municipalities to think about this. You do need to have a 3-foot setback from all sides and chimneys. And Jeff Smith of Emergency Management did reach out to all of the municipalities' fire departments and had a special training for them in regards of solar on roofs. But still, it's on a case-by-case situation. If your house is fully engulfed, a lot of these fire departments aren't gonna send their men to try and make a hole on the roof because they're always collecting. Even if they're off, they still have a charge to them. And because even though you're supposed to have an engineer come when you put these on your roofs, they don't know what the integrity of the roof is once it's engulfed in flames. So a lot of times if your house is on fire, they won't even send anyone inside, they will fight it externally, which is something to think about. The big elephant in the room is decommissioning. Again, what do we do if they are no longer, the company's no longer around? Who takes care of these? Is it up to the municipality? Is it up to the landowner? And then you're stuck with this that was brought up before, that you can't just go to your local dump and drop off solar panels. And this is just another example of not only setbacks, but your build-out area. If you have zoning, you have a buildable area percentage that you are able to build on your lot. This just takes up their entire backyard. And again, what does that do to your property value? So I'm going to leave this up, but I'm not going to go to the next slide. It deals a little bit more with what the municipalities should plan for it, whether it's moratorium in the process. I'll touch on it a little bit. But also for farmers to think about, there was a conference a couple weeks ago in Utica dealing with clean energy, and one of the farmers in Pennsylvania is dealing with a co-operable setup where instead of doing a large solar array like you saw and them taking up 20 acres of your farmland, they would take up 40 or 60 acres of farmland, but it would be spread out, smaller panels. They're still connected, so you would just have one pylon pushed into the ground, but they have supporting beams, so for wind instances, or if they can't go far enough because the bedrock is too high, whatever the case. And they were raised up a little higher, and that let cows, sheep, goats, they were still able to use the land as pasture. They weren't sure how it dealt with Ag and Markets and the assessment because you were still able to use that land and have solar panels on it. So don't know what the assessment would be like for that yet. But they were also experimenting with how crops were planted under all areas of it. They're still testing that right now. Some even had sprinkler systems built to the top of the solar panels, which would help with the cleaning of the solar panels, but it would also fall down into the plants that were, or the crops that were planted below the solar panels. So you could have the best of both worlds. You wouldn't have to lose your farmland, you could still use it, and then it would really only take up about 5% where the poles were instead of these long panel arrays that take up acres of your land. So that's something, because with all the lease issues that they're looking into and seeing how that can help farmers out as well. This is just to touch on the steps moving forward. Like I said, town of Florida put a moratorium on, and the only reason is just because the amount of applications that came through, they got overwhelmed. So there was a 6-month moratorium put on so they would have time to look into creating a code that helped with all those issues, the setbacks, the glare, all of that. They actually accomplished it in, I believe, 4 months. It was a very fast process because they didn't want to hold up the development. They just wanted to make it a safe and secure place that people can do what they want with their land. Companies can come in, and that's what farmers or residential homeowners wanted, but they just wanted to have something in place. It does not restrict any solar in the town of Florida. The only time a special use permit is needed is for the historically zoned district, which is mainly just Fort Hunter because of the smaller sized lots. So they want to make sure they get a closer look at someone who wants to do that. And what a lot of people don't know is that you still need a building permit if you want to put these on. It's no different than if you're doing a pool, a deck. The local building inspector or code enforcement officer still needs to come out to your house along with the company and their engineer and everyone else they hire. So you still need to keep your community in the loop of what's going on. And then just this is for local municipalities. New York Sun has out a draft permit that you can use and modify to the municipality's liking. These are two examples of what Clifton Park and the town of Hurley have done with their permitting process. So you can have that information. And really, if you have any questions, municipalities, we have tried to reach out to everyone to help with their zoning codes. If you need us to come out and speak to the community at your planning board, at your board meetings, or just help you with the process, we are using the town of Florida kind of as a boilerplate, and then municipalities can change it. Amsterdam used ours as a boilerplate and then changed it by their zoning district. So we're here if you have any questions. You have my information, but I also have my cards if anyone wants them. So.
Are there copies of the town of Florida zoning codes that you could PDF?
Yep, I have that, so if you email me, I can email it right back to you.
One thing, you touched on the rooftop setbacks for firefighters. October 3rd of this year, the New York State will adopt the international building codes, okay? And in those building codes, there's fire setbacks, there's also the International Fire Code. New York State issued errata addendums to those codes, and it modifies those setback numbers. We have it up on our website now. I got some additional comments from the Department of State. I got to tweak what I got up there. So give me about a week, and I can probably get you the latest version of what the changes are.
I can ask for all the speakers to come back up, and then we'll do an open Q&A if anyone has any more questions. Now, while they are all getting situated, if you guys need to contact them for any reason after the event, they're sure more than welcome to your questions afterwards. They have all the contact information right inside the program tonight. So, anyone want to start off tonight's questions? Do you have any?
Yeah, we'll start off.
All right,
Yeah. Suppose you get one of these solar farms and a severe storm comes through. You got a lot of lightning, you got high wind, and the solar farm is partially destroyed. Now, who is responsible?
The owner. The owner of the system, which is the developer.
Okay, landowner is not involved.
Depends on what your contract says. That's where it will tell you who is responsible for that type of thing, and if it doesn't say anything, then good luck. Both sides are gonna blame each other or possibly shift blame. So yeah, you want it in your contract.
But you don't own it, right?
No.
Sometimes, but remember, sometimes it doesn't matter who owns it, if they don't come out and fix it,
Yeah.
it's there. So yeah, you should have it dealt with in a contract, or a lease or whatever.
It's just benchmark, run along that similar statement. Some of the other issues that I've heard of in the past, as these contracts come up and stuff to be aware of, is many of these landowners are not paid until the system is actually connected. So if it's like out in Oneida County, there's one sitting right across from Cooperative Extension. It's been sitting there and it's not connected to anything. Weeds growing underneath and all that. So nobody's getting paid at that particular case. Same thing is, if, another thing to look at in the contract, they may want to take 30 acres, they're only going to put panels on 20 of that acres, they're getting paid for the 20 acres, not the full 30 that's under lease. So it's just other things to be fully aware of in your leases and your contracts before you sign on the dotted line.
And that's a good point too. There's a period in there too, where the question is who bears the risk? And you know, and if it's not hooked up and it doesn't specify that. So, you know, those are things that I would never have specifically thought about that until he said it. And, you know, I would have looked at your contract and you would have, that would have been something that wasn't there. So, you know, so that's why it needs to be talked about and really these issues thought.
And I think nobody's gonna look at that contract, no offense to any attorney in the room, nobody's gonna look at that contract better than you. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're gonna think of things just like you just did. You know, somebody brought up the maintenance and just mowing under it, I never would have thought of that, but that's a you know, 20 acres around all these poles, I mean, you're talking about something that's pretty serious, so you just have to think about those things.
So you're saying more or less look at the contract yourself, get your concerns.
Don't do it, don't sign anything, yeah.
No, look at the contract yourself and all your concerns, make sure your contract straightened up with it.
That's how, if I had a lease in front of me, that's how I would approach it. I'd have a list of 25 things.
Down the contract.
Yeah.
Does anybody know anything about, is there any, ever any pollution on anything after 20 or 30 years? Any drippage or pollute the ground on them or anything?
What's inside of them?
There was some scares about, and I can't think of the chemical, there was a chemical that was used in processing solar about 15, 20 years ago, and some of the systems that were abandoned out in the Midwest where trees grew through them and things, and they were leaching this product out into the ground. That chemical's no longer used. Most of the stuff that's there, it's silicone, so it's basically sand, metals. There's no real chemicals inside them per se. They are solid state device, so.
Yeah, they don't
really leach anything out.
They have a lot of dirty, they're expensive, and I don't want to leave that to somebody that 20, 30 years from now, we got all that problem.
I'm not condoning, you know, taking farmland and putting solar up, because, you know, there's plenty of brownfields out there that, you know, we put them on landfills, things like that too. So, you know, those are good options for towns if you have a landfill to develop it, because you're not going to use it for anything else.
If I wanted to draw the dirt to a landfill, that's the only thing.
The what?
I don't have to draw the dirt underneath it to a landfill for 20 years.
No.
That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, sir.
Have you ever seen anything like an MSDS sheet for any of these kind of?
You know, it's not a chemical kind of exposure. It's like I said, silicone is glass. It's basically a sand that's made into glass. There's aluminum typically, metals, that kind of stuff are into it. It's not a chemical type of thing. Usually it's
There's
aluminum
nothing
frame.
else as part of the wafer for an there's nothing else in part of that silicone wafer that's.
Not really. It's silicon crystals and a conductor. It's like a foil conductor. There's usually
It's all solid, except when you get a liquid in the transformer, and that's no different than you have on a pole.
Yeah, transformers are out on the pole. That's at the interconnection location.
You didn't talk about batteries, the most dangerous part of the whole system.
Well, there's no batteries in solar
Goes
farms.
right on to the line. What happens when we get too,
No, we really can't because it's not cost effective. We're talking about large scale community distribution where you're using the grid as a battery.
So batteries are only good on the, like a residential?
They're small, the battery technology is not where the solar technology is. To equip this, your home with batteries, you can double the cost of it. It's not cost effective. It's better off to have a standby generator for the few times you lose power.
He's right though, Tesla and General Motors are trying to use their when the batteries are no longer viable for use in the cars, they're going to be using those for regional charging.
There'll be some stuff that they'll be.
New York Sun is teaching a course to
They'll be
fire
doing-
that
they'll
talks
be-
about batteries.
Yes, they do, and I've taught the course. And there's batteries, but not at solar farms, not at that level, not on that scale, okay? So if we're gonna talk about the solar farms, let's keep it in that perspective. Batteries that are chemicals are a hazmat situation in a fire, right? That's the reality of it.
how is the weather gonna affect these fields? You know, we get 2 foot of snow,
From a
it's
production
30,
point of view, or
whatever.
from a well, The systems are designed based on annual production, okay? Annual production factors in 50 years of weather data. There's a formula, like I said, that we shared that tells you what the output of the system will be per watt based on 50 years of known weather data. Now, counterintuitive, the peak performance of the system is on the coldest day of the year. There's temperature sensitive. That's why New York's ideal for solar, as opposed to like Arizona, it's too hot for solar. So Arizona's gonna get more hours of sun, but we're gonna get more peak performance on a cold day. So that cold, snowy day, when the panels finally shed the snow, and it's real bitter cold out, but there's snow on the ground, is gonna give you your peak performance. That's what the systems are designed to, for the wiring to be able to.
So they're set high enough so that the snow, as it falls off of them, will not build up to the,
Yeah, you don't wanna put it right on the ground because,
well, I
then
just
you're gonna have a
wondered.
snowbank in front of it, it's gonna shade it, yeah.
Well, you know, I've seen it when there was 3-4 foot of snow, flat around this area.
Again, that's where the engineers come in, they should look at the snow load for that area,
Yeah.
know what they're dealing with.
Yeah, right.
Buffalo's different, you know?
And again, just a couple of mentions that you guys said about maintenance, that's probably an important provision to make sure you have in there. Because, I mean, it may become an issue. Maybe you're not responsible for it, but you need to know you're gonna get paid whether they're producing what they need on it or not, right?
They make sure it produces.
Yes.
If it doesn't produce, they lose money.
I'm sorry?
I was saying to the gentleman's concern, if the systems don't produce, they know it, they monitor them.
Yeah,
So
they're
it's up to
monitored.
them, they're the ones that lose the money.
Right.
Yeah,
If it's not a lease, you get paid regardless.
But remember, if they don't do well,
That's where they go.
then they may not pay you.
So it's a contract, a liability.
The snow issue also, something to think about is snow plowing, access roads to
Yeah.
the
Getting
arrays
in
of
and
the
out of there.
property. You know, I mean, I was around in the 80s when the cell towers were coming out, and I remember a guy negotiated a lease, okay, you've got an access panel road into that cell tower, guess what, you're gonna use my driveway, and you're gonna plow that road. And he goes, well, we don't have a plow, he goes, well, you're gonna hire somebody then. And they signed that contract, and he had his driveway plowed every time it snowed. So, you know, you can be creative.
Going to the ag assessment, so I wanted the penalty on the ag assessment, if we did this. If I subdivided out 25, 30 acres and then put it in a different LLC or something like that, would it just be penalized on that 25, 30 acres?
The whole thing.
Or could they go back to before it was subdivided?
No, I think that would probably work. That would be my guess. I mean,
That whole farm, it'd just be that 25,
Yeah, I
30
think
acres.
You could also limit your liability.
Maybe
Yeah,
yes,
you know,
maybe
I
no.
think
Nobody's told us that.
We're also gonna have buildings,
Yes.
fencing, lights, all the things that will annoy you close to your house.
Well, I'm not sure they're gonna have a lot of lights, but
Yep.
there's not a lot of load there. Their purpose is to generate power. They're gonna have some monitoring equipment typically.
Fencing, they're gonna be fenced? They're gonna be fenced?
Some of them fence them, some of them don't, it depends. I mean,
Signs, so that people don't get in there, knowing that they're coming to it, are
A
aware of
lot
it?
of them, standard is 8 foot
That's
tall.
right.
Sometimes they put the barbed wire on top, sometimes they don't, but they'll, if you have something in your code too, you can negotiate with what kind of fencing, so it's just not the ugly metal fence. You could do whatever you could do, trees in front, berming too, if it's in the code, or if it's up to your discretion if it's on your land. You can always talk to them.
The wiring should be inaccessible, which means it should be barricaded and so that you can't touch it, or be at least 8 foot high in elevation, you know, for the actual wire, because you're talking systems that could be up to 1,000 volts DC.
Yeah.
You certainly don't want you know, a kid biting into the
That's
cable
what I
with
mean.
a toddler.
Animals.
I'm not a fence guy because gates get left open and kids are gonna get into them, especially on residential property.
You're talking,
I would prefer them to be up high.
you're
and
talking
secure.
here in a community like this, if you don't have a wire fence or something, how do you know whether your horses are gonna get in, or goats, or any kind of a farm animal? I mean, I've seen farm animals places where you never believed they would be, but they were there. If there's a will, there's a way.
Barbecue. Kids
I don't think they can, I
Yeah.
don't know if they can hurt walking by them, but, you know, the only way they would get in trouble is if they chewed on the wire.
And they do promote that, they do promote, I mean, they're tall enough, usually about 8 foot, the bottom slope will be, so it's tall enough that a person or an animal isn't going to touch even the bottom of the panel, which wouldn't really even be that big of an issue. Like I said, a lot of farms are looking into having goats in that area where their solar panels are. A lot of them that are out now, deer frequent them because it's quiet, they get in somehow and will, you know, be walking through there. So it's not so much an issue with that, it's more keeping kids and people from messing with the equipment.
I've been in the solar industry for about 4 months now professionally, and come across all sorts of ideas and things that, you know, solar farms, things of that nature. I've heard you guys address like property value, a lot of different things. How much money does a solar company itself make compared to what we're making? One of the ideas I came up with, that maybe the rest of the community, major landowners think of that rent or window, instead of doing the lease, purchase it and become your own house for the community. You could draw a business here, everything's gonna get clean. I know Berlin, Vermont, it's pretty much green right now. I'm just thinking that should be part of the discussion.
Well, the USDA has a program called the REAP program. It comes out every spring that offers grants and low-interest loans, to farmers that want to have solar systems installed for their own consumption. And we usually work closely with them. We put an announcement out and try to get that done. They're more smaller systems, but they're designed just for the farm. Farms themselves have an ag exemption on their utility rates. If you have a residential property, you can typically you're limited at 25 kW systems, but farms can go up to 100 kW and still keep their residential electric rate. And the advantage to that is, especially if it's a dairy farm and you're milking at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to get hit with a demand charge. You're going to get kilowatt for kilowatt, so you can produce all the power during the day and you can use it all at night for the same rate. So that's a huge advantage to farmers. We also have solar thermal systems out there because there's a lot of hot water, which in dairy farms are ideal for those.
But as far as becoming, you know, your own power source for the whole community, you know, like something like
you could be a sponsor. You could be a sponsor of one of the community solar farms.
There's no way to become your own power source for the town?
You could, but again, it's economics, it's finance, it's how much money.
You get the federal rebates that these solar companies are getting.
Right, but you need government dollars, you need probably venture capital. To take a loan out on something like that for, you know, 1 or 2 individuals or even on small group.
I'm thinking like 20, if you had 20 major landowners, or even less, probably, you know, I could get it done. As far as recouping the money, I don't know how much.
Right, I mean, owning the land is the first part, but it's,
right.
You know, the infrastructure you gotta put in that thing. 4 to 6, would you say 4 to 6 million bucks for it?
Yeah.
But if you're paying 15 cents a kilowatt hour right now for the utility provider, and all of a sudden your town, you know, you can cut that out and charge.
Well, there's 2 discussions. One, do you want to offset your own usage? One, do you want to generate power and make money off the generation? Make money off the
Just think of the legacy.
The advantage if you put it on your own house, you get the 30% federal tax credit, you get a 25% state tax credit, so you're getting 55% of the cost of the system in money that you would have paid in taxes otherwise. And then on top of that, you're going to get an incentive. And there's low interest financing.
We need a question over here.
The grazing system, do they have access roads to each panel, or is it just to the main hookup to the wire?
You mean the ones I was talking about?
Yeah.
The ones they did that were testing, it's not through a lease, it was for their own personal use, so they
Okay.
just had them up, they didn't have any fencing or screening of them, they were just set up in the farm fields, and
Okay.
just adhered to the normal setbacks in place in the code. They also did it, if they had like a big horse area and there was a fence around it, they put them on the posts to the fence too, to kind of keep them out of usable land, so it's already on a space that is being used, and they just put them on the fence. So that was just personal use.
All right, if there's no more questions, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. If you have more questions, I'll obviously